Lament is running towards the Lord with the things that naturally make us want to run away from him.
I can make it through the day.
You already feel totally alone. You feel like you're the only person in the world that this is happening to. And when there is a lack of lament by those, particularly in the community where this abuse has occurred, it takes you from feeling singularly alone to being actively abandoned. And when they won't even admit what happened, or in so many cases, they're covering it up, it's not just a betrayal of you, the individual, it's a betrayal of the faith, and it's a betrayal of your faith.
With me, for you are always.
And I think my question to myself, really, as a worship pastor and to those who are involved in choosing the songs for the church to sing, is, are the songs that we're singing giving people space and a vocabulary in which to articulate, like the Psalms do, the reality of that feeling of sorrow and turning to the Lord with that?
When it seems I've nothing left, you speak peace in every breath. For you are always
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zane. I'm the Director of Development and Operations at Grace. And you may have noticed I'm not Pete Singer, our Executive Director. Unfortunately, today he was not able to be with us. So I'm stepping in today. But I'm really excited about our Grace Life conversation today. We're going to be talking about the topic of lament. And we have some awesome guests today. David Pittman and Phil Monroe will be joining us today. But real quickly about Grace, some of you may know, some of you may not know. Hey, Phil. Grace is a nonprofit, and our focus is to empower faith communities, Christian communities to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse. We do that through our services that we provide for churches, policy review, trainings, and we also do response services as well, such as investigations and cultural assessments. But we also do a lot of work on the thought leadership side, creating research articles and resources just like this, where we talk about issues and we try to get it out into the public, so that we're thinking about these things more regularly and talking about them. But yeah, I want to invite Phil and David now to join me. So I'm really excited about our guests today. Phil is a worship minister in the UK, in Nottingham. He works as a a director of ministry.
That's right. Yeah.
Working on worship, and he has thought deeply about the issue of lament. He was highly recommended to us when we brought up this topic, and so we're really excited about his perspective on lament and worship in the church and how we need to embrace this practice within faith communities. We also have David Pittman here with us today. David is a long friend of Grace, a long friend of mine. He has been vocal about his experience in the church and has been passionate about helping churches address the issue of abuse with courage and with compassion, and has also been a resource for many survivors who've experienced similar things. And so with that, I'd love for Phil, for you to maybe just share a little bit more about yourself, and then David, you as well.
Thanks so much, Zane. It's great to be with you. Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, and where I look at work in the local church, and I think it's been a joy to be able to pastor a number of young people and families as part of my role. I'm also a worship leader, leading worship at our local church in Nottingham, as well as around the UK at various conferences and events. And over the last 10 years or so, I've been trying to write songs for the church here. And some of those have been used more widely across the UK. And one or two of those have zoomed in on this area of Lament, and I'm sure we'll get into speaking about that a little bit later on.
And I'm David Pittman. I'm the director of Together We Heal, where we try to be a resource for survivors and their families of any background. It is not directly church related. And then, of course, I've been working with Grace now for at least 10 years. Helped work with the team that developed the Safeguarding Initiative, and been trying to educate churches all across the country on how to better protect kids and properly address when abuse has occurred.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Phil. I'm excited to explore this topic more. So I wanted to start the conversation with a definition I found about lament. I'm going to read it. I'd love for you to interact with it. Think about, what do you like about it? Where does it miss the mark, or how would you change it? And you don't have to have, a big, a lot of rationale behind your thoughts. I'd just love to hear your initial response to this definition. Okay. Lament is a powerful expression of sorrow, pain, and confusion directed towards God, often within a community. It's a way of acknowledging the full weight of our suffering while holding on to faith and hope. All right, who wants to interact with this definition first? And do you need me to read it again?
No, you can read it one more time, Zane. That would be helpful.
It's a good generalization. That's a good generalization. It is supposed to be about turning to God to express grief, right? To express remorse. I think it should also be not just a prayer to God, but being prayerful, right? It's not just that one-time thing. It should be an ongoing.
Awesome. So you're thinking more in terms of kind of an ongoing, regular kind of practice that the church or individuals would do to express those harder emotions. Is that kind of what you would add to it, David?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Phil. Yeah, that's, to me, that's the key. It's anyone can say they're sorry and not mean it, right? And so if there is repentance, right? If there's repentance in that remorse, then you are going to go the other way, and you're going to not continue doing the things you were. And that shows in me, that's being lamentful.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Phil, how about you?
Thanks, Zane. I really appreciate this as a definition. I particularly like the second half. It's a way of acknowledging the full weight of our suffering while still holding on faith and hope. I think that something within lament is it gives us permission, and also it gives us a vocabulary in which to bring some of those hard things to the Lord, that we most naturally would want to maybe bury or keep to ourselves. I think I heard someone say that lament is running towards the Lord with the things that naturally make us want to run away from Him. And so I think there's something in that which captures that essence, that it's moving towards the Lord with the full weight of our suffering, while still holding on to our faith and hope. And holding on can sometimes maybe feel like an exaggeration of what we're feeling in that moment, because sometimes it might feel like we're dangling on by a thread. There's not much there holding us at all. But, obviously the Lord is holding on to us with His almighty hands, even if it feels like our faith is weak in that moment.
And the significance, right? I 100% agree with you, Phil. The significance of it, right? somewhere along the line, I've heard some preacher or some teacher say that for somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the Psalms are David's laments, right?
Mm.
And if that's, and we have, oh yeah, we have that whole other book. And those aren't, and those are just a couple of sections, right? So I think it's safe to say lament, understanding the true nature of lament is significant, right? And so it should therefore be importance to those of us that call ourselves people of faith.
Mm.
Beautiful. Thank you both for sharing and adding your own light and understanding of lament to this conversation. I think, our hope today is that we dig into a topic that I don't think the church talks about a whole lot, that Christians talk about a whole lot. I think because it acknowledges that there's pain and there's suffering, and we want to quickly move past those things oftentimes. Phil, so I have a question for you. What's your story with lament, and how did you how did you um, how did you learn about it? But what was your first kind of wrestling with this idea of lament as a worship pastor, and maybe even as
Mm.
an individual? What sparked your interest in lament?
Yeah, well, I think I'd zoom back to sort of 2018, 2019, and in that season, I was aware of some difficult things that were happening in the world, in the life of the church across the UK and across the world, and as a worship pastor, I was looking for songs which would help us with that, which would give us something of this vocabulary in which to articulate a response to hard things, sad things that were happening in the church and in the world, and how do we cry out to God and give it a language and a tune for that. As a songwriter, I'd never written a song of lament at that point, and so there was an element of kind of wanting to challenge myself. Oh, I feel like I need to and want to exercise that muscle of lament. And then, of course, 2020 came. The pandemic came, hit the world. We were suddenly having had our kids at school, being out at work. We were suddenly at home. We were, baking our sourdough bread. We were learning to retile the bathroom. We were doing all those wonderful creative things. And suddenly, in that moment, I think for myself, as a pastor, I was looking for opportunities to encourage people who were struggling, recognizing the huge mental, emotional, spiritual impact that the coronavirus pandemic was having on people in our church. And I was kind of waiting and preparing for this tsunami of pastoral needs that I thought was about to come. And I didn't expect that the main need was going to come actually in my own life, and just wrangling with some hard things, some moments of feeling quite spiritually low, feeling quite distant from the Lord, feeling quite overwhelmed by life and ministry. And then we had some family loss as well. My father wasn't well, and he ended up dying. And then my wife's father, who wasn't well long term, he ended up passing away. So within a year, we had two significant griefs in our life. And so that kind of ambition of wanting to lean into this whole area of lament in a kind of, I guess, creative, possibly academic way, suddenly felt very real for us. And so some friends of ours who I've been doing some songwriting with for years brought me some words based on Psalm 13, which is, of course, it is that Psalm of Lament. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? It begins. Um, and I wrote a melody to go along with that. And that came out of a very real, very raw place of response of wanting to um, articulate the valley that I was experiencing at that point in life and in ministry. And for me, I guess self therapy was songwriting in that way. And Psalm 13 is a great place to go to if you're kind of wanting to kind of look at what lament is in the Bible. And, we see the psalmist there. He kind of defines to us what lament is, which is this turning to the Lord, crying out to him. And he does that in the first verse. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? And then he also brings his complaints to the Lord and asks that the Lord would help him. He says in verse 3, "Consider and answer me, O Lord, and give light to my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death." And so lament is kind of turning to God, bringing our complaints to him, asking for his help. And then also at the end of this psalm, the psalmist chooses to trust the Lord with what he's going through. He says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love." Verse 5. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. So that there's a bit of a turning going on, significant turning going on there. And as a worship pastor, I think I've acknowledged moments where you look down from the platform on a Sunday and you see in your congregation of whatever size people who are walking through deep valleys, significant hardships, losses of various kinds, and yet within their suffering are choosing to sing and trust to the Lord. And singing is an expression of that. And sometimes they can't sing. Sometimes they're standing there, hardly able to utter the words of the songs that we're singing. And I think my question to myself, really, as a worship pastor, and to those who are involved in choosing the songs for the church to sing, is are the songs that we're singing giving people space and a vocabulary in which to articulate, like the Psalms do, the reality of that feeling of sorrow and turning to the Lord with that. And so that's something, I guess, of where I've been on a journey as a worship pastor.
Wow, Phil, thank you for sharing um, both your personal story, but also your journey as a pastor and as a worship leader. I think that's encouraging to hear, and just how you articulated um, the importance of acknowledging. So Diane Langberg has a quote. I want to share it with you all from the book Suffering in the Heart of God. She says, "Pain is the only protest in the human constitution that something is wrong. It's the only thing that raises its voice against existing abuses. If you jump to silence the pain, you will fail to find the root." I think, you know, unfortunately, we've we've seen at Grace, and we've heard stories of a lot of survivors, that there was um, silencing at different levels, silencing of pain. Um, there's a unique suffering and pain and trauma when there's abuse within the church. There's a many um, many tell us who've experienced abuse in the church that it's hard to even enter back into a faith community, much less, you know, um, actively participate in a faith community. And I think, Phil, I'm sorry, David, I would love to hear from you just the the ways in which pain was silenced, in which there was an avoidance, the lack of an avoidance of pain or avoidance of suffering, and what that felt like as someone who experienced abuse in the church.
The impact of it is devastating. I mean, there's just no other way to, it's gutting actually when that happens, because you already feel totally alone. You feel like you're the only person in the world that this is happening to. And when there is a lack of lament by those, particularly in the community where this abuse has occurred, it takes you from feeling singularly alone to being actively abandoned. And when they won't even admit what happened, or in so many cases, they're covering it up, it's not just a betrayal of you, the individual, it's a betrayal of the faith, and it's a betrayal of your faith. It causes you to wonder if any of it is true. It causes you to question if faith is real, if any of the things you're being taught are real. I think the increase in faith leaders and faith communities being exposed for being predatory and protecting the predators, it directly correlates to the number of people who identify these days as the spiritual nuns, not N-U-N, the N-O-N-E-S, like nun. Even here in the United States, there was a Pew study that came out, and they had 23% of Americans identified as Roman Catholic, 24% identified as evangelical, and 28% identified as religiously unaffiliated. And I mean, I think it's easy to see that correlation, why that would happen when there's this lack of lament, there's lack of owning this, when the very place where children should feel the safest is being exposed where predators move the easiest. It's no surprise that children who grow up in this environment are going to leave, or adults who witness it are going to move on, because why would you stay where you no longer feel safe and protected? The other really, the tragic, another real impact this is because so few of our faith communities will acknowledge this or will address it openly or learn the knowledge and then the willingness to prepare if something like this happens. Many folks turn to drugs, to alcohol, to a number of self-destructive things to numb themselves. And it's had a lethal outcome, right? Both physically and spiritually. The addictions, the incarcerations, being left destitute. We are preached to about salvation. Think about that. We're constantly preached about salvation. And then think about all the meanings of that word has to it. And then imagine you've been instructed, you've been taught, demanded, maybe even. They've said all these words, but when it came down to actual salvation, those actions left us with a wrecked body and a vacant soul.
David, what you said just resonated with me and made me think about safety in a way that I hadn't thought about safety before. The idea of when the church fails to allow community lament or to acknowledge pain, acknowledge suffering, it fails to provide safety on a spiritual and emotional level. That those feelings are okay to have those feelings, and that's an okay response to what's going on in their life or in the world or whatever ways they're feeling confused or pain or suffering in this world, and that the harm that can cause, the outcome of, well, if I'm not supposed to feel pain, or if pain is bad, or this whatever is going on, and I can't go to the church, I can't go to the Lord, they're going to go somewhere else. There's going to be another search to address that. And I think what you're saying is, and why, so I guess my question is for you, just a follow-up question, David. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the church is failing to provide spaces of lament? And what do you think could be healing or helpful for survivors of abuse? Like, how do you think, if the church were to be able to provide that, there's spaces of lament, there's practices or routines of lament within our faith, how do you think that would change the way a survivor of abuse might?
Well, certainly, if you, it's like what I mentioned or just a second ago, right? If they talk openly and honestly, if they gain the knowledge on how to, we talk about in the child safeguard, that's the reason why we created the child safeguarding, which has become other safeguarding of other areas within Grace. But that was the whole point, was to give churches Phil, you brought up I love the word you used, vocabulary, right? We have to, as parents, we got to teach kids the vocabulary to understand if something is wrong, how to vocalize that. Churches have to be taught what vocabulary we use when this, because yeah, most of us are taught, everything's good, everything's great, thank you, Lord bless. But when those tragedies come, we feel like, well, we can't talk about that. And certainly when issues of abuse. Every single church I've been to, Zane, every single one, at some point during the hours that I'm there, somebody pulls me aside and has a private conversation with me and says, I've never told anybody this, but what you described is what happened to me when I was such and such years old at this such and such church. And this isn't a unique experience I'm having. Every single survivor I know who's gone on to, or even just others who aren't survivors, who've gone on to be safeguarding educators and teach churches, every single person has it at every single church. And it's because it occurs. So once we start opening up to it, then we can learn the vocabulary, learn how to lament properly, how to address these things properly.
I love that. The messaging from the church is so important. That having these spaces or not having these spaces is communicating something to these to everyone.
They got to talk about it honestly. They got to talk about it honestly.
Yeah. So Phil, I have a question for you. Let's think practically about churches and worship and how they go about ministry. We're talking about kind of the importance of having lament. What are some practical ways churches can incorporate lament into worship? What does it look like? And can you give some concrete examples of or suggestions on how that can be done throughout the life of the church?
Yeah. Thanks, Zane. I think I'd start by saying I don't think it's straightforward necessarily, and it's not a one size fits all approach. I think your church will be different from my church. The things that people in your church are facing will be different, and the response may look quite different from place to place. I would say that I think the primary way in which we pastor our church is as we gather on a Sunday. It's as we gather as the people of God. So I think time and space within our regular gathered services, rather than a kind of add-on, is absolutely key. I think trying to find space within our Sunday service in order to have a time of lament. And it could be that we choose a song which points us towards that place, or there's times of prayer or liturgy which bring us to that place. And I think that's really, really important. We've certainly had key times. I think back to some terrible things that have happened in the UK over the last few years. There was a terrible fire in London and a few years ago in the Grenfell Tower, and a number of people died. And it was a moment that really struck the whole nation. And sometimes those things happen on a local level and on a national level. And that was a moment for us. And the following Sunday, we just needed some time. We asked the congregation to sit, to pray, to cry out to the Lord in prayer for the people affected by that. We had a song which was written by a friend of mine, which is called "A Day Will Dawn," and it reflects on some of the kind of terrible things that we face in this life, but it also points us to the day that will dawn when Christ will come and pierce the darkness of this world. And so it's trying to bring together those aspects of lament and hope. Another example of something that we have tried to do is to have points in our year where we encourage people to lament on various losses that they have faced. So maybe it's a service of remembering those who have passed away, and so a time of lament within that. And we look back to some of the old hymns, which kind of lead us on a bit of a journey of lament. It is well with my soul, and the whole story behind that was a story of loss. And when peace, like the bit when sorrows like sea billows roll, when peace like a river attendeth my soul, it begins. And even in the midst of that, he's able to say, it is well with my soul. I just wanted to come back to something that you said, David, which you were kind of picking up on my use of the word vocabulary and how we teach our children that. As I've been reflecting, I do think there is a kind of childlike aspect of lament which is helpful. We have children. We have two boys who are 9 and 6, and children, they cry and they wail with things that aren't fair in the world. They rage against injustice, not getting what they want sometimes. They're completely honest about their feelings. They don't try and package them to be nice and polite. Well, certainly ours don't all the time. They get frustrated when they don't understand. And they let you know it in no uncertain terms, don't they? But also, I know as a parent, when the shouting and screaming and kicking and crying is spent, they relax sooner or later into the comforting embrace of a loving parent. And so I do think in the life of the local church, one of our roles as leaders, as pastors, as those maybe who are in those different roles, is to give people space. And then ultimately, under the sovereignty of God's, we want to help them relax into his embrace. And so I think there are things we can do within the regular pattern of our week by week ministry, as well as a few one offs across the year, which welcome people into that space.
I love that. I was struck. So a comment was left in the chat about lament almost as something just to overcome. That it's something that we need to move past and get to just believe. And I think what this person is trying to identify that there's not a dichotomy. There's not lament isn't a lack of belief. Well, I think, and it's not something negative. I think it's a reality of there's going to be some laments that are going to be there for the rest of our lives. I think about Revelation. Jesus says, he's going to wipe every tear from our eyes. We're going to be in heaven and we're going to be crying. Like there's going to be sadness that we're still going to have to grapple with even in heaven, when with God, in the presence of God. And I think part of being created by him is there's going to be confusion, there's going to be pain, there's going to be suffering, and we're not like something that we're always going to be able to work through or get through. David, as you think about a church doing this well, coming alongside someone well, and being a picture of lament that means something positive and has helped someone work through things. Do you have a story or a thought or an idea about, what would that church look like, and how would they do that well for someone who's experienced these in the church?
And so this is the story of right. This is where the abuse that happened to me occurred. And when I came forward publicly, sometime after that, the man who is now the current pastor, unsolicited, he reached out to me. He was very kind. He was very genteel with his questions, but he asked me if it would be all right if he could try to do something about the fact that this perpetrator was currently working as a minister at another Southern Baptist church. And they could have easily done what, tragically, most churches still do. They could have said, look, that was 30 years ago. We didn't have anything to do with it. Our hands are clean. They could have told me what the Georgia Baptist officials said. Sorry, nothing we can do, but we would like to pray for you. They could have said what the national officials said: every church is autonomous, we have no control. But that's not what they said, and that's not what they did. And if it's kind of all right, I'd like to quote exactly what he said when he was asked about this. He said, knowing that our processes in the Southern Baptist Convention do not provide a clear pathway to address it, we stepped back and said, regardless of autonomy and our relationships within Southern Baptist Convention, what is our responsibility? I mean, think about that for a minute. Even though this pastor was hired 30 years after the abuse had occurred with me and other boys, he and the church, once they learned, said, ask themselves honestly, lamentfully, what is our responsibility? Actually, let me find another. There was something else I want to read to you. Here we go. Even though we didn't have knowledge about what happened then, today there is mourning among our members and the leaders from that era who wish they had known and been able to warn. But what we didn't know now, what we didn't know then, we do now. We mourned with them. We took their allegations seriously. We engaged with the accused and the church where he was serving as a worship leader. And this is key to me. We held the admitted offender accountable, called him to take appropriate actions, including a full confession, repentance, to never serve in any leadership role. Now, I know that they didn't have any legal way because it was past the statute of limitation, but at least think about that. They actually called him out. They listened to the voices of all these boys that were harmed, and they believed us. They took the steps that whatever they could to hold this person accountable. They demanded and got a signed confession. They gave instruction. They did things for us that no other church leader or even law enforcement agency. And then sometime after all that took place, I had a friend of mine from my old hometown call me. He's like, hey, did you hear about this Sunday service they had? I was like, no, I live in another state, I don't keep up. He said they did an entire service. The whole Sunday service was centered on lament. It was all about, what you and the other boys had brought to their attention, mourning for who had been harmed, taking steps to better protect the kids, not just lamenting the past, but how could they, like we've been talking about, moving forward, making this a better place, acknowledging what had happened, the music, the sermon, everything. And I didn't have any idea about it, right? There was nothing on the news. There was nothing on their website, nothing to try to make themselves look better. But when he said, look, I want to let you know, even though you weren't there, that, they were talking about it. There was a lot of tears. There was a lot of egos. And he goes, and it wasn't like coming from up at the pulpit, right? This was the folks and little groups talking about this. This could be our child. This, elders that had been here. This was one of our kids, right? We practically helped raise them. So those are the things. To me, that's what's being lamentful. Not just a one-shot thing, standing up one time saying you're sorry. Here's what I really think. Being lamentful is no different than any other aspect of being a Christian. It's not about saying words, it's about living them, being a Christian. And I just wish all churches could ask themselves that one question: what is our responsibility? And then answer and act from a place of lament.
David, thank you for sharing that story. That's powerful. To think about lament as responsibility and accountability of a community. That is, church leaders and the whole congregation acknowledging not just general pain and suffering, but specific aspects of harm caused, of abuse that is allowed to happen. So I'm going to bring in a question from the Q&A that I feel like just dovetails perfectly with what you're saying. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I have a thought as well. But from your perspective, is congregational lament preceded by an independent inquiry or investigation, conclusions, and apology? And is there anything else? So I think what this person is trying to figure out is, as a church is responding to something that happened in their own congregation, that happened with the leadership, how they responded to abuse or something else, where it would trigger an investigation into what happened. Where where do you think lament fits into that? Is that before, after, during? You know, how would you think about that?
Just for me or Phil, who would you?
Let's start with David, and Phil, I'd love to hear what you'd have to say as well.
So there would be a couple of things I would want to know. Is this going to turn, is that independent investigation, is it truly independent, right? Is this something that the church is doing? Are they the ones doing the investigating? Because, you know, I just want to make sure it actually is independent. Is this something that actually can lead into criminal? Can there be criminal charges? Because I would understand why anyone involved in investigation can't talk until they've spoken to law enforcement, and some people may not be able to talk because their lawyer told them not to. So that's I would want to know that, whether or not that would probably explain why some people might or might not, if there's criminal. But if they're talking about, yeah, I would want to know that first.
So the person who asked the question said it would be the investigation is totally independent and it's not criminal.
All right. Yeah, then the church just if as a survivor of whatever offense, or a victim, or whether you don't necessarily is a child molestation, but it's just some other harm in the church, then if they're not naming, if the church isn't naming what it is they're being lamentful about, then I would question the authenticity of it. Right? In that, what, you know, when David's talking about in Psalms, he's naming the murder, he's naming the adultery, and all of these things. He's asking for forgiveness and to cleanse him from his iniquities, right? You can't just, at least in my opinion on this, you can't just say, sorry, God, for my whoopsie, right? Right? We got to call it out what it is so that we can correct that behavior that's either wrong or hurtful, and then explain moving forward how we're going to not do those things. So yeah, I would be wanting to hear firsthand what the church had to say.
So I think you're bringing in a interesting dynamic of this that we haven't really explored yet, is the church, maybe the church leadership or the people in charge of running the church, or the ones that cause the harm. How do you trust them to lead you through lament? Is it something that should be led by that same group? And even if they did all the right things to respond with an independent investigation, and they were faithful in living out the recommendations, and they want, and maybe, you know, it, I guess I'm trying to figure out, it's still really tough, right? Still really tough because of the people who've experienced that harm, that maybe it was some sort of form of abuse. Um, is lament then, could lament be abused to kind of just try to get the church to move past something? Again, you know, we want to make sure lament is used correctly with faith communities. They're not using it as a tool to minimize what happened. But is there a right use of lament in that situation? Phil, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Zane. Wow, I think there's all kinds of very difficult and complex pastoral situations and abuse situations which immediately come to mind, where I think churches probably have got this very wrong, and people have been very hurt. And I do wonder if one of the aspects that could have caused more harm maybe is churches taking too long to provide any space for people to articulate hurts and sorrows. And even if that is not in a perfect way, where everything has not been lined up in terms of reports back and formal apologies done, if there is a way with appropriate leaders within the church for people to gather and just have space to come to the Lord, to cry out to Him, to acknowledge their hurt, to bring before the Lord the things that matter most to them in that moment. I think I think we would be wrong to delay that time. In as far as I'm aware, in pretty much most situations. Um, I think we need to act on that, and where we don't, we cause more hurt.
Could a faith community set up a time of lament? Like the leaders say, like, hey, we're not in a position to maybe lead it, but we would want maybe to invite somebody else to lead this time of lament from the outside. Do you think that would be a good idea?
Yeah, I can absolutely see how that would be an appropriate thing. Maybe a trusted church or a partner church, or someone who feels like an appropriate, safe leader to come in to help in that situation. I can see how that would be potentially a good thing for a church to do. And it might be as simple as just having I know very practically, the church building is open on Wednesday night for people to come and to respond to the Lord. You might have somebody there leading a few songs or just playing music quietly, but creating a space people can write down prayers or something which feels a little bit organic. And maybe moving from the organized to the organic, and giving people an opportunity to respond individually in a kind of corporate way. I think it is interesting in the Psalms, isn't it, how often the language of lament is I, me, to the Lord personally. And that doesn't mean that we don't do it together, but there is an element of encouraging people together to respond individually as well as together.
Thank you for exploring that question. I thought it was a really good question. It's a tough question too. Um, so, Phil, another practical question. And I think after this, we may have time for one more question. So if you have a question, please feel free to leave it in the Q&A. But before that, Phil, I have a question for you. What are some of the unique challenges in leading a congregation in Lament? And what are some of the best practices that you found, or key considerations when you want to do it well and with sensitivity? Yeah, do you have any thoughts related to just doing Lament well?
Yeah, I think it probably feels like exercising a very different muscle as a worship leader or a church leader, to what we often like to exercise. And when we lead people in praise, um, people often like to sing quite happy songs, quite uplifting songs which are celebratory, which adore the Lord in a very kind of upbeat way, joyful. And I think we have to go looking for songs which help us to articulate different things. And and I think that's something which I find as a challenge is I want to find songs which are really honest to the Lord about things that are hard. And I think there are some good examples of that. There's I quite like the guys, Matt Papa, Matt Boswell, writing some really interesting songs at the minute, but they've got a song called Lord, from Sorrows Deep I Call. And that is a really honest, beautiful song to to lead people in that way. So I think it's looking for some specific songs which are helpful for our congregation. but also ones that we know, which we can look at and use in a helpful way, that are known to people well. Yeah, so I think there are some challenges there. But I think there's some opportunities. So let's not give up on what is difficult just because it's hard. I think it is right for us to lean into things that may take our congregation a while to get used to exercising that muscle and leaning into that area within a corporate gathering.
I love the idea of exercising the muscle. I think, the more you do it, the better you're able to work through. And I think listening probably would be a key
Yeah.
aspect, is making sure everybody is listening well to um, how to be sensitive, how to be thoughtful in lament, how to, um, these are the deepest and hardest parts of people's wrestlings with the Lord. There's got to be a lot of grace, of patience, um, and letting people figure that out on their own time. I think, like, not forcing anything. Um, but I kind of want to end with another question. I think just one more question, because our time is running low. So let's say you're in a congregation or you're in a community, and it doesn't feel like they're willing to be curious and learn, and maybe even try and lament. Um, how do you encourage leaders to take responsibility or to even think about lament as a practice? How would you, from maybe as a congregant, how would you encourage your leadership to explore these things in maybe a gentle or maybe not so gentle way? David, love to hear from you.
Um, well, I'm not always known for tact. So I might not be the best person to ask this question. I'm pretty just straightforward, right? Because Phil, you talked about it, right? Everything seems to be praise for this, praise for that, happy, happy, joy, joy. Even, you know, um, I've left the evangelical spaces a long time ago, and I've been, my wife and I have been a member of a more mainstream, liturgical church for a while, and even our denominations are having contemporary services that's what they call them, with it this more praise. And yet I want to remember, right? Jesus wept. He cried over loss. He grieved. He agonized. And so that's why I would want to remind the leadership, right? That we have this broken world, and if we're not truthful and honest about the things that happened. Phil, you mentioned the fire that I even heard about that not too long ago. We're here recently. We've got tornadoes ripping through the country, and not that long ago, hurricanes. People, whether it's this physical destruction, right, or they're spiritually broken, the last thing we need to hear at that moment is how great we are and what good things, right? It's not that it's have to be woe is me. A survivor of anything, right? A survivor of abuse, a survivor of a tornado, a survivor of a fire, they just want to know they've been heard. We've got a day and age where you've got these pseudo macho flame throwing pastors who declare empathy as a sin, and that's not right. My take is the most empathetic human being that ever existed was the person we call Jesus Christ. And if we don't relate in that way to the victims of any kind of crime or abuse or whatever is going on in their life, because there's not a big or a small, thing, right? It's to them, it's having an impact, and I think we should always remember that and let them be heard.
So I'd love to hear. We got a couple more minutes. Some of your last thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a little story I was struck by just as I was thinking about this week, which is a great violinist who used to perform, I think, across America. Itzhak Perlman, and he was a fantastically gifted musician, but also a man who struggled with his health. I think particularly his mobility. And there's a story of him performing, I think, at one of the big concert halls in New York City, and he was performing a um, very complicated violin concerto. And halfway through the final movement of the concerto, one of his strings on his violin broke, it just went bang. And he stopped for a moment and kind of considered what to do. Then he cued to the conductor that he wanted to finish the piece, and he actually finished the whole piece of music with three strings on his violin rather than four. And after the performance and the applause kind of died down, he hushed to the congregation, to the crowd there, and he said that the thing that we need to do is to make music with what remains, make music with what remains. Um, and so, even in tragic situations in the church, in difficult things have happened, abuse things have happened in our cities. I think there is work to be done. We can still, as he says, make music with what remains, and that that may be painful, and it will be painful, and it will be through tears. But maybe within some of those times, we could experience some of the most special, the most deep, the most um, opportunity for growing in our faith times. I do think there is so much potential when the church endeavors to try and get this right, to move towards the Lord in those seasons when they want to run away.
Well, Phil and David, thank you for the time you spent with us today, just exploring this topic. I think there might be many people who've experienced abuse in the church who, if there was more of a practice of lament, um, there might be some place and that they were able to go to express some of the pain and the hurt, the confusion that they were experiencing um, with people that, as Jesus said, you know, as the scriptures say, we need to weep with those who weep. Um, I wonder if we embrace that idea as the church and created those spaces for one another. You know, what difference that would have made in a lot of people's faith and a lot of people's lives when we're walking through a lot of this darkness. So I appreciate you all joining us today to unpack this topic. Thank you for your time. Everybody, thank you for your questions. Yeah, the questions were really great today in the comments. I appreciate everyone's this engagement today with this topic.
Good to meet you,
I
Bill.
hope everyone has a great day, and we will see you all later. Bye.